Less than 1% of the Earth's surface is occupied by coral reefs. Despite this, coral reefs are one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth, supporting about 1/4 of all ocean species. Marine life isn't the only thing supported by coral reefs. The value of coral reefs have been estimated at $30 billion US and perhaps as much as $172 billion US each year, providing food, protection of shorelines, jobs based on tourism, and even medicines. Coral reefs are critically important to life both on land and in sea. However, they are in grave danger. For over 2 years now, coral reefs around the world have been under siege by climate change, destructive fishing, and pollution. This siege takes the form of coral bleaching, a process by which stressed coral loses its algae and is left bleached white and very vulnerable. Coral bleaching is a global event with the potential to have catastrophic consequences worldwide. These consequences will have a cascading effect like dominoes of disaster, starting with loss of habitat, causing a drop in fish populations that will have an untold impact on tourist and fishing-based economies. This speech will inform you on what coral bleaching is, why the species rely on coral reefs, and the people who are affected by coral bleaching. To understand what coral bleaching is, one must first have an understanding of what coral are and what they do. A coral is a large marine organism made up of millions of tiny polyps that are constantly growing. They offer food and protection to millions of marine species that inhabit them. A coral head will continue to grow as long as the conditions around them will allow it. They have the potential to live forever as long as nothing too damaging or drastic happens to them. They are a hotbed of marine life and the ideal location for fish to reproduce and raise their young. Coral bleaching is basically the killing of polyps due to unnaturally high water temperatures that separate the polyps from the algae that sustains them. When the polyps die, they stop growing, causing the entire coral head to die with them. The increase in ocean temperatures puts the corals in a stressed state where they start to lose the colorful algae that supports them. This loss of algae will eventually lead to a white coral that is susceptible to disease and vulnerable to death. It is estimated that while coral reefs only occupy 1% of the Earth's surface, they are home to more than 1/4 of the world's marine life. These species rely on coral reefs for home protection and food sources. Coral reefs are their own small ecosystem, like rainforests of the sea. Should a reef die, then the huge decline of corals therefore affects those fish that closely depend on coral colonies, either as feeding grounds like the polyp-eating butterfly fish, or to find protection like the small-sized damselfish. All of the fish populations that previously depended on the reef for their ecosystem are displaced when the reef dies. Following the death of a coral colony, the space that the polyps once inhabited is invaded by new forms of invasive algae that quickly reduce the area's biodiversity. There are even fish who have adapted to live within a coral reef through camouflage, protecting them from predators by blending in with the colors around them. According to Matt Kaplan, even these fish are in danger. The initial bleaching probably makes the brightly colored fish easier for the predators to see, so fish populations begin to suffer even before the coral is dead. All of these changes to the marine ecosystem following the bleaching event will cause the environments to undergo drastic, unpredictable, and unprecedented changes that would disrupt not only the fish who directly depend on their coral reefs, but also those who rely on the reefs directly, like humans, for example. The group of people who suffers most from coral bleaching represent a pillar of the global economy, fishermen. Following the death of these coral reefs and the subsequent displacement of marine life across the globe, fishermen who would patrol these areas for a livelihood would have nowhere to go. Their established fishing routes would be useless after all the fish that once had inhabited those routes were forced to move. The disruption of so many jobs could bring down an industry that the entire world relies on, would have impacts even farther reaching than that. Karen Kirkpatrick of How Stuff Works Science Department even goes so far as to predict the fishing industry, which employs 38 million people worldwide, would collapse as a result of the death of all the coral reefs. It's not hard to see why either. If reefs were to disappear, commonly consumed species of grouper and snapper could just become memories. Oysters, clams, and other creatures that are vital to many people's diets would also suffer. And experts say commercial fisheries would fail miserably at meeting demand for seafood. With fishermen being unable to meet demand, the world hunger crisis would only become worse as populations who relied on fish to meet dietary needs would be left out of luck. It doesn't stop at the hungry either. Even the sick rely on coral reefs for medicine. Believe it or not, coral reefs provide a perfect microism for scientists to research and study marine life. Taking those microisms away would not only disrupt current research projects, but would also put a halt to critical life-saving research, since some types of coral and marine species that rely on reefs are being used by the pharmaceutical industry to develop possible cures for cancer, arthritis, and viruses. The catastrophic aftermath of global coral bleaching would take years to recover from, in the sense that as the bleaching displaces marine life across the world, scientists and fishermen alike would have no frame of reference as to what life is like under the sea. The entire global landscape would be changed in unforeseen and unpredictable ways that could set the world back hundreds of years. The fallout of mass coral bleaching will mean loss of life under the sea on a scale only matched by the chaos it will cause on land. The collapse of economic pillars like the fishing and tourism industries will bring nothing but panic and pain to human society. The disruptive effects coral bleaching could have on science will certainly halt work on life-saving medicine and throw the pharmaceutical industries for a loop. Global coral bleaching isn't something that will happen overnight. It is something that has been happening for many years and will continue for many more years until either they die off or humanity intervenes on behalf of life. Less than 1% of the world's surface is occupied by coral reefs. Roughly 25% of all life in the ocean directly depends on them, and about 100% of humanity will be negatively affected if we do not come together as a society to put an end to climate change and save those colorful coral reefs from being bleached.
You need to show around one?
Oh yeah.
It's all gone.